Beyond Survival is the official podcast of Waymaker Institute. Our desire is to equip you as a follower of Jesus to thrive. Each episode reveals how the gospel impacts the entire human experience for the advancement of God's kingdom. Ultimately, Jesus' promise of abundant life means we are meant to go beyond survival. So, let's jump in with today's episode.
All right, on today's episode of Beyond Survival, we have Maria Rolf.
Yes.
And
the great Maria.
The great Maria. So Maria is my friend.
It's true. Long time.
We're friends. Would you say that?
Go way back.
Way back. We're also, I would say, co-laborers, right?
Yep.
And 10 years now.
At least.
At least 10 years.
Yeah.
We served in youth ministry back in the day.
Yeah.
She was a small group leader. Did you know this, Sophie?
No,
She was a small group leader.
Okay.
And she followed this group of young ladies from preschool, kindergarten,
yeah.
all the way through graduating high school. She was their small group leader.
Wow. That's amazing.
You want to talk about like mentorship or
Yeah.
like being a
Commitment.
voice of what Jesus could look like in good and bad seasons? Powerful. So we got to serve together. And that was many years ago. And then recently, you helped build the academic program of the Institute and some in the classes, but you taught a class, spiritual formation. Word on the street is you're one of the favorite professors, actually.
Success.
We took an official poll, and you came out on top.
Come
and so,
on.
yeah.
I didn't see those
Meeting
results,
you.
but I knew in my
that's
heart.
because I didn't show them once I realized that wasn't at the top. And no, but you're a voice where, and I've told you this before, but I've wanted just your mind, your heart, and your voice to be as much part of the Institute and speaking into our students. And so you've taught, but recently you've been called to some exciting things, I would say, by God, both vocationally, but also in your family.
Yep.
So how about you just start explaining where God has you right now in those two areas and what he's called you to.
Yeah. So vocationally, I work for a nonprofit that serves foster children in various capacities. The biggest area, or I guess maybe what they started out doing in kind of the field that I'm most closely associated with, is working with kids who are aging out of the foster care system. So they're really not kids anymore. They are, we call them youth, but they're ages 17 to 20. They have grown up bouncing around from foster home, group home, sometimes back to their bio families and out again. And now they're turning 18. And you know what it was like turning 18. Suddenly you feel the weight of responsibility of your life on your shoulders. Well, just imagine if you've never had any stability, any consistency, no positive relationships, no money, nothing. Yeah. But that responsibility of life is on your shoulders. The vast majority of them do not succeed. And what I mean by that is a good percentage of them end up homeless. Most of them end up homeless, incarcerated. Very few of them pursue education. Most of them are unemployed by the time they're 24. They are very vulnerable to trafficking. Just their outcomes are really negative. So I work for a nonprofit that helps. We're really trying to change those outcomes. And so I get to do community engagement and development. And my role is, the best part of my role is getting to invite people from our community into these kids' lives, because their biggest issue really is relational poverty. Yeah. They don't have people.
Wow.
And my covert operation behind it really is to get God's church around these kids' lives, because I think it's our job. So that's been a really sweet, very unexpected job that fell into my lap, but really has just been not just an answer to prayer, but I think something the Lord has been able to use. A lot of what he's kind of led, both through education and life experience, kind of led to this opportunity to live out my theology in a field that I never imagined working it out in before, but it's been really meaningful. my husband and I also just recently became foster parents. So we went through the foster parent training process about a year ago and got certified. Didn't hear anything. Got a room ready as much as you can get ready. You don't know what age you're going to get, what gender you're going to get. So you just kind of get loosely prepared. And I think we just thought, we'll probably get like a first grader or, And beginning of September, I got a text message. Josh was out of town. I got a text message saying there is a newborn baby boy in the NICU who will probably be there a few more days, but are you guys in? And so we said yes to a little boy.
Okay, real quick. Did you say yes and then tell Josh, or did you be honest?
I screenshot it and I sent it to Josh and I said, call me.
Good. All right, just checking.
No.
I'm just checking.
Yeah. But we said yes, and we said yes before he got home. So I went to the NICU and met our son for the first time by myself.
Well, Josh was still out of town.
He's still out of town.
Wow.
He came back the next day. And so we kind of instantly became parents to a newborn in September. And 6 months later, we got another text message about another newborn. And so we currently have a 7-month-old and a 2-month-old, sweet, precious babies who honestly, given their entrance into this world and the things that they were kind of already dealing with in their bodies are miracles.
Miracles, yep.
And it's been a really exhausting season, but we wouldn't give it up for anything. These kids are just a picture of grace. So, so foster care has kind of become this world that I had no experience in before, and now suddenly it's kind of just become one of the biggest parts of my life.
So let's just start off, because the reality is you probably feel like you're in survival mode. So what have you gone to when you just look around, you're like, how did we get here? What's going on? What day of the week is it?
Right.
What do you try to go back to that helps stabilize yourself, you and Josh, as something as profound or simple? I don't know. What do you go to say, like, this kind of stabilizes in the midst of all the chaos that is our life right now?
Yeah, I'd say some stabilizing factors. One, we have an incredible small group. I mean, incredible. So the community that the Lord has given us, every family in our small group has adopted out of foster care. So that's 5 families. And man, this journey, until you go through it, there's just like no way for you to realize what it's like. So to have this supportive community that forged the path before we took it ourselves, knew what we needed before we even asked. Like, we took a newborn overnight, and overnight we had everything we needed to bring a newborn home. Wow. I mean, that is the power of biblical community.
Yes.
So there's that.
It's kind of like what we read in Acts.
Turns out, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean,
that's so fascinating.
We've needed nothing.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
That's so beautiful.
I think the habit of getting up early to feed newborns has also given us the ability to just make sure that we're carving out time for scripture. So I actually use that time to read while I'm holding this precious gift. And it really frames it up differently, starting the day out that way, being just rooted in God's story and getting to play a part in it in this unique way, in this unique season, has been really anchoring. Yeah.
Wow.
I think this next question is really going to test our friendship.
Oh, boy.
It's a little bit of a curveball. So, you ready?
I don't know, but let's go.
Let's go.
I'm ready.
Okay. Can you help me understand how you were the official fitness model for a major university while you hated working out and even had to borrow running shoes for the photo shoot?
This is where over 10 years of friendship is a ruiner.
She looks a little, there's a little like,
I was not
glaze
expecting
in the eyes
this.
right there.
I don't know is the answer to that, because there were people who are actually like on a scholarship at that university
Yes.
to be athletes that were not chosen.
Nope.
And yet the girl who sat at a front desk of the seminary for 10 years led a relatively sedentary lifestyle.
That is the most polished way I've ever heard that said.
Yeah, I don't know, Brett. That's just the life I live. You know, I just strictly modeling.
I love it.
But thank you for
To me, this
bringing
sounds,
that.
I have no background to this, but this sounds like you are willing to say yes and take risks.
Thank you.
That's
Wow.
what I look at it as.
What a
Thank you.
Like,
spin.
you're willing to take risks, do things outside of your comfort zone.
Thank you.
So
That was
I
very
applaud you.
outside of my comfort zone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Thank
that's
you.
great. Yes.
I feel like there's a little bit of team up going on here between you, but it's okay.
Just remember you started that.
Yes.
Yeah, that was you.
Can you explain to me how you stumbled upon a village in Italy to meet your ancestors without any context? Like literally just traveled to a village in Italy and
Yeah.
actually met people in your
Yeah.
family?
That
What?
was a gift from Jesus himself. That should not have happened.
Wow.
We had plans. My best friend and I had been planning this trip to Italy for years. We finally did it. And I knew that my family originally came from this tiny remote village at the very, very bottom of the boot where
the boot,
nobody
yeah.
goes.
Yeah.
You know, like you don't go there because it's so remote. No one even, it's a different dialect of Italian they speak. I mean, it's just, there's nothing touristy about it. We hired a translator. Even those plans got switched at the last minute. And so we kind of just went in blindly with somebody that was going to drive us around and just show me where my ancestors came from. And I thought, well, that'll be cool.
Yeah, just to see it.
And it's such a long, crazy story that I would love to feature sometime. But the short of it is we started in a coffee shop and just sat down, and it was such a tiny little village. They realized these girls are not locals.
And it's not normal for there to be like visitors or
Right.
tourists. Yeah.
Yeah. They recognized that we were visitors. The little old man came up, starts trying to figure out who we are. And
Grandpa?
they said, he looks just like my dad. Our translator, her name was Beata, and she just explained in Italian. She said, this girl's from America, but her ancestors are from Tiriolo. Her last name is Marsico. And his eyes got really wide, and he said, Marsico. And he yelled something in Italian to a little guy across the side of the cafe, hands going, and he's like, Marsico.
God.
And his eyes got really wide. And all of a sudden, everyone is yelling, Marsico, Marsico. And I'm thinking, I knew it. We were related to the mafia.
The
and
mafia. Oh, yeah, you're done.
This is how it all ends. This is how it all ends.
Oh, man.
And to make a long story short, he leads us out of that cafe, introduces us to some other little Italian guy, takes us to 4 or 5 different houses. We end up entering the home of a lady who's my cousin.
Wow.
That's a movie.
That's literally
and
a
it just
movie.
starts there.
That's a
She
movie.
introduced us to more family, showed us land that belonged to my family
Wow.
that I had been wanting to see.
That's amazing.
And then we finished the day around a table with all of these cousins.
Oh, my gosh.
No one speaks
like-
the same language,
Wow.
but we are having the best time laughing. I mean, there was just like this connection that goes far beyond language. I was sitting with family.
Yeah.
Wow.
And oh man, it was you could not have scripted it. Will never happen again. Sweetest
So
sweetest
cool.
day. Yeah.
Wow.
So
Wow.
total gift.
Wow.
Don't have any idea how it happened, but
amazing.
That is
I wouldn't
amazing.
believe it if I didn't have pictures to prove it.
Oh,
Wow. Okay. Well, I need to recreate this experience.
Track down your
I
heritage.
I did the DNA.
Yeah.
Oh,
23. I did 23andMe.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
And?
my dad's family is from Nigeria.
Okay.
We're a part of a tribe called the Igbo people or Gobo people.
Wow.
It's pronounced one of those ways. So that's our tribe. And then my mom her family is from France and Germany. So It's very,
Wow.
I could, all over the place.
Yeah.
All over the place. So yeah, we would love to travel to those places.
You have
one day.
to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It'd
It
be
just
cool.
brings such a sense of like, man, this is part of who I
Part of
am.
it,
This is
part
my
of it.
heritage.
That's right.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. At the same time, Sophia, I would probably maybe set your expectations
Oh,
a little lower.
Yeah.
That way you
I
don't get
know.
disappointed.
Yes.
Sky's
I'm
the
gonna
limit,
go
girl.
in,
Find your
you know.
land. Find your family.
I will be
You can do
very,
it.
I'm a 4, and so I already struggle with like
Over-idealizing.
fantasizing, and so I would go into these trips like ready. Like
Listen.
I would make something happen. I would be like, that person
You look
kind of
like
looks
me.
like
Kind of
me.
looks like me.
There they are. So I don't wanna go
Oh,
there.
man.
But it'd be fun.
Okay. Yes. I just sorry.
No,
I
I'm
just
glad
wanted
you
to go
asked.
through
Yeah.
In regards to this idea of a survival mentality, can you talk to us about a season in your life, just as a follower of Jesus, maybe based on external circumstances or maybe internally, that you just felt that you were in the mode of survival? Just kind of explain maybe that season of your life.
Oh man. I can definitely think of a season where, gosh, I felt like I was barely surviving.
Yeah.
And a lot of that was a lot of external circumstances. I'd just gone through a lot of transition all at once. In 2016, Josh and I got married, and he and I had lived. He and I had lived in separate states the entirety of our relationship until we got married. So he lived in Texas. I lived here in Lynchburg. We dated long distance. We got engaged. We were engaged long distance. We did not live in the same state until after we said I do. And so obviously I had known we were planning on me moving to Texas. So I was kind of mentally preparing to wind my life down here, which I'd been here over 15 years.
Yeah.
So a lot of life, lots of roots. My parents lived here. This church was my family. I had worked in the same place for like 1,000 years.
Yeah.
You know, booming fitness model
You
career,
got a career, yes.
side hustle.
Yeah.
But my life was very rooted here, and ministry and all of those things were here. And when Josh and I were engaged and we were deciding, like, well, if we're doing this, one of us has to move.
Yep.
We decided it was going to be. There wasn't really a major reason other than I didn't want him to have to leave his job. And he worked at a big church in Dallas, Texas as their missions pastor. So, you know, obviously the months leading up to our wedding, I'm like gearing up toward moving. But I think there was just so much going on. I didn't prepare for how much of a identity shift that was going to be.
Or probably even, in all fairness, you don't realize how much your identity is in these things you mentioned.
Totally.
Right? The work, your
Totally.
community, your church, your
Yep.
ministry, because that's all you had known.
That's all
so
I known.
even that is just part of it, not necessarily preparation, but more of a realization
Yeah.
of how much it had been tied.
You don't realize it. And it's ironic because I had spent so much time, you know, especially with my girls that I'd been walking through life with, just talking about identity in Christ. Identity in Christ is the only thing that stays stable.
Wow.
But then until you are
on.
like literally 100% of everything about you changes, you don't realize how much your identity actually is wrapped up in all these other things until it's gone. So marriage in and of itself is a huge transition. Marriage and moving 1,000 miles away is like, whoa, holy cow, it's very jarring. 3 weeks before our wedding, my dad unexpectedly passed away. And so losing a parent is just, you feel like you're, it's hard to describe. And it's like only people that have lost their parents understand what kind of grief that is. It's not, you feel like you're part of a club that you don't really want to be part of.
Yeah.
It's just especially when it's unexpected, that's just a real, I don't know, a sense of your parents have been a source of stability, and they've been the people you've known the longest in your life. And so losing my dad it just came out of left field. And it was obviously right on the front end of me getting ready to have a lot of life change. So it was both just like shocking and hard and like, what is happening? Just losing my dad and feeling like, man, Lord, how did you almost feel like, really, God,
What was the most prominent question, like when you were honest, that you asked God in those seasons?
I think those questions didn't start coming. There was such a whirlwind. It's like all of a sudden I'm like, wedding planning. Oh, funeral planning. You just are like going.
Yeah.
Funeral planning, wedding, honeymoon, pack up a moving van, get to Texas, start life. We have a reception in Texas. And then things start to settle. And it's like, okay, normal life is starting. It didn't take long for me to feel very out of place where we were. And my job was online, so I was home by myself a lot, and that's when the questions start going. And that's when I was alone enough to start going into the hole of analyzing everything that's just happened. And I think there was a lot of, at first I thought, okay, I understand death theologically, and so I'm going to put this in its theological box, and everyone, the Lord knows our days are numbered, and, I just kind of made sense of it, and okay, and then once that, get rid of that, like, hey, that was really painful, and seriously, God, what the heck? I thought I was being obedient and doing all these things, and you start to feel like, what did I do wrong? And like, I think I had felt like I had just lost favor with the Lord. Wow. Because I think there were some expectations of what I thought life was going to be like that were very different. And it was very hard to get plugged into ministry. It was very hard to feel connected to people. It was dealing with grief. That was uncharted territory. And I think I just felt like, like something I had done, had made me lose favor with God. And I don't know, he felt kind of mean. So, survival, that was, I would say, a season of about 2 years of not just barely surviving, but really diving into a lot of doubt. I think the sexy term right now is deconstruction.
It wouldn't be the first time that has been mentioned
It would not.
on this podcast.
Yeah, definitely went through that. And really, really hard season where I dealt with things that I never thought I would deal with. My mind went places. My emotions went places. I felt like a shell of myself. And so, really rough season. Grateful to be out of it.
You talked about feeling like a shell of yourself. What would I have seen that would give me a clue that that's kind of where you were in that season? Like, obviously a lot of the stuff you talked about internally, in your mind, in your emotions. As you look back, what would I would have seen in Maria that would have given me a clue that that's where you were?
Mm-hmm. I think I was just super negative. Pre all of that. You knew me very well on the front side of all of that, and I'm silver lining, right?
Yeah.
And I want to say yes to everything.
Yeah.
People, I very much believe in God's church, and I want to say yes to everything pertaining to God's church, bringing about the kingdom of God
Yep.
in any form that I can be a part of. And so this season, I just felt like I was in a place where I didn't trust anyone. And part of that was just, I think, the environment I didn't fit into at all. And I didn't have a place that I actually felt like I could use my giftings. So I was just getting really jaded about the church. And, you know, this was during a certain election season that I just watched the world that I had grown up in blow up over politics, and I watched just it become something that I felt I did not want to be a part of. So there were a lot of layers to just disillusionment with what I had believed in so much, which is God's church and his plan A to be the catalyst for bringing in his kingdom. I just got so disillusioned with every aspect of what I had always been a part of, that I just became very negative and jaded and questioned really everything I believed in, because it just wasn't adding up anymore. So it was personal and also just disappointment with what I was seeing. It was really just a perfect storm, I think, of dealing with those things.
What is, if you could think of what would be the low point to that? Was there in your mind like a low point? You said this was the moment, the rock bottom.
There was, there were several days that I can even just remember the exact place I was and what I was doing, and where I just almost had to like grab onto something to feel like I just wasn't drowning in hopelessness. I just didn't really see a way out of my situation. And when you question everything you believe, it's like, what do I hold on to? Like, what's going to actually bring me out of this? I've never thought that I would have so much doubt in the like core of who God was.
Yeah.
And there was one day in particular that I was at home and I was, trying to get work done, and I couldn't focus on anything. And I just, almost in just a desperate, calling out in somewhat disbelief, I just said, God, I don't even know what I believe anymore. And I said it out loud, alone in my house.
Yeah.
And the word that just came to my heart, which I had just felt so much silence for months. I was so grateful to actually sense something, was the word resurrection. And the Lord kind of just brought my thoughts outside of my emotions and really reminded me that you might question everything and have every reason to question everything the church is doing, everything you've been through. Death definitely rocks people. Yeah. You might have everything with a question mark over it right now, but you know that the one thing you cannot question, the one thing that there is more evidence for than anything else, is the resurrection of Jesus.
Wow.
And that's really cerebral and not touchy-feely and not like, oh, you're going to have breakthrough and healing. It was just very like, Jesus rose from the dead. If that's all you have to hang on to, that's enough.
Mm.
And I said, okay, I can hang on to that.
Wow.
And it really was just hanging on to the resurrection of Jesus that slowly but surely started to bring, I think, restoration and life back to pieces of me that felt really dead. And it was not overnight. I mean, it took probably another 2 years for me to really be able to honestly say, I'm on the other end of this. And my faith looks different now. It's a little rough around the edges, maybe.
I like it.
And it's a little grittier, but I think I needed to go through that, and I needed to be undone, and to be grounded on the thing that our faith is hinged on, and it's the resurrection of Jesus. So,
Wow. Thanks for sharing.
yeah, thanks for asking.
Man,
What you got?
I'm just shook over here. No, I mean, this is very personal. And I will just cry. But, walking through a very similar season with my husband, losing his mom, and experienced very similar emotions, even though she's not my mom, like she was like a mother to me. And having that same feeling of, God, you're so mean, like why, like just hard for you to wrap your mind around. And thinking, like, in our experience, Marcus's brother and his wife gave birth to their first baby 2 days after she passed.
Yeah.
And, our son was only 9 months, 10 months old. And so just like the anguish and the anger that comes with that. And it was the same reaction of like, God is so mean. Like I remember thinking that same thought process, and just struggling that whole year. Like I became a mom.
Yeah.
I had a really wild birth story. Isaiah was in the NICU. So that whole year felt like some sort of cruel, like sick joke, like standing in the background. Like, and this was maybe how you felt, like, is God playing some sort of like sick joke on me? Like that whole, have I lost favor with him? Like what have I done to cause this? But I think that like I had a very similar experience in that it was like, I was like, I'm done. I'm done with this church. I'm done. And not that I was, but like in my heart, I'm like, I need to check out from the Jesus thing for a little bit.
Yeah.
But it was very much God meeting me, and it was so simple, and it sounds cheesy, but it was like what I held on to was Jesus like encountering me and telling me that he just wanted to have a friendship with me. And it like, that was like a pivotal, like shifting moment for me. And that came, 2 months after losing her. And it was such and I feel like it's similar to the resurrection, and that I don't know how to explain it, but just that Jesus is continuously pulling us to himself, even in the midst of pain and suffering. It's almost like he wants to remind us of himself. Like he just wants to remind us of who he is. And it's like the same, like coming out of that, I mean, still like in the process of that, I feel like my faith is getting a bit grittier, which it should be, I think, in all of us. Not that we have to walk through things like that for this to happen, but like that gritty faith, I do think is what protects us and helps us endure in seasons where we're trying to survive or where it's hard. Like the whole concept of like very much kind of how I like process faith in my mind is like God is a healer, which he is, and he's a redeemer, and he's going to bless you, and da-da-da. When all of that kind of falls out of the window, like what does carry you through those survival seasons? And so that has been the journey that we've been on. And so everything you just said
resonates, very
emotional, resonates a lot. Not to like shift the topic, because this is maybe in line.
Love it. Go.
I want to understand, which I feel like I probably know the answer, but I just think you should tell more about this. Why would you like voluntarily sign up for another baby?
Yeah. I don't think we could have said yes if the Lord had not put some really strategic things in place literally up to 2 days before we got that text message about our little girl. this is going to be a bit of a story.
I love the stories.
A couple things. One, I guess, provision-wise, he put some things into place, but then also he prepared our hearts for this. Probably about, I don't know, a month and a half, 2 months before we got that second text message about our little girl. I was sitting on the couch, and I was holding our little boy, and I was kind of just drawn to look over in our kitchen where there is a painting that...
Oh, I love this story. Sorry, I didn't know where you're going.
Yeah.
Okay, here we go.
There's a painting that hangs on our wall in our kitchen. And it's a painting that was hand-painted by Robin Fouts.
Who's going to be on episode coming up in the next series.
Stay tuned.
Yes.
Robin is a dear friend. And, you know, Robin has a gift that I don't have. And that is, like, prophetic word. I don't have what she has. She just hears from the Lord. And, you know, she'll share, I'm sure, a lot of her story and beautiful things that have come out of the tragedy that's happened in her own life. But one of the things the Lord has given her in the last few years is this ability to paint. Like, she's just overnight, she became this, like, professional painter. So shortly after Josh and I'm going to backtrack a little bit. Shortly after Josh and I moved back to Lynchburg, and, you know, yes, I'm back in my hometown, and I'm like so grateful to just be getting a fresh start. Josh is now going through the identity crisis. And so, you know, we are both just still feeling really wounded. Okay. So we're 2.5 years into marriage. I'm freaking out because I'm afraid he's going to go through all the things I went through. And, you know, we're both just feeling wounded. We bought this old crazy house that we're trying to restore. Life is crazy. And Robin reaches out and she's like, I feel like I'm supposed to paint something for you guys. What are your colors? So I just tell her, gray. Gray. Everything's gray in our house.
I feel like we would probably say the same thing, actually.
Yeah, it's a millennial thing. I don't know. Everything's gray. So I just tell her gray, like gold, you know. And she goes, great. That's all I said. We're pretty minimalistic. So a couple days later, she comes over and she has this beautiful painting she's made for us. And it's simple, and it goes perfectly in our house, and it's these gold trees, these 4 golden trees that are uprooted. They're kind of their roots are exposed, and it's just kind of in the middle of the canvas, and they're floating. And she hands it over, and she goes, this is the picture the Lord gave me for you. You've both been uprooted, completely uprooted, but you're growing together. And we just wept because it was exactly, it just illustrated exactly how we felt. Both of us had just had our lives totally uprooted, but we're together, and the Lord was holding us in place, and we were still growing. And the roots were still deep, even though we just felt like everything was out of place. So, you know, we put it in our kitchen, and, you know, it's something I see every day. But going back to this moment, I'm holding our little boy on our couch, and I look over, and I just am being drawn to this painting, and there are 4 trees in it. And I said to Josh, you know, our little boy's life was uprooted too. I mean, he's been taken from his family. His family has a lot going on. And, you know, his life is always going to be a little different because even though we are going to love him like he's ours for the rest of his life has been uprooted. And then it was almost, I had a Robin Fouts moment. Like I said, this doesn't happen to me very often.
I love it.
And I knew it deep enough in my heart to say it out loud to Josh. I said, there's a little girl coming.
Wow.
And he's like, okay.
Yeah.
We just started sleeping again. No, maybe in a little while, but okay, that's cool. That's cool, Maria. And I just knew there was a little girl coming. And probably once or twice a week, I just said it to Josh. Like I didn't say it to anybody else. I just said, there's a little girl coming. Here we are now, 2 months later. Our little boy is getting a lot more active. We're struggling to work from home with him there. We're praying for childcare, which is a nightmare to find right now.
Yep.
And just kind of out of the blue, the Lord gives us this precious girl who was just made for our family to come be our nanny and to watch our little boy. And so she's there with him in the house, and we're able to work. And that happens literally 2 days before we get this text message, much like the first, that says, there's a baby in the NICU that needs a family.
Wow.
Are you guys in? I know you've already got a baby, but are you crazy enough to say yes? And we just both kind of looked at each other, and we couldn't deny all of these things that had just come into place that we prayed. And we called our nanny to make sure she'd be okay with saying yes to Sue.
That's awesome.
But we look back at that painting, and it was just like, there's 4 trees on that painting. Wow. Okay. So we said yes. And then a couple hours later, we're back in the NICU.
Wow.
5 months after we'd been in the NICU, and got to hold our little girl. So,
Wow.
Yeah.
Man.
That's
amazing.
Powerful story.
Amazing.
So, when I hear your story, I see both in like the current situation, but even before, when you just talk about that season where honestly you experienced trauma.
Yeah.
Right? Like
Sure.
all of these transitions all happening at the same time. The loss of your father, that's all pretty significant.
Yeah.
And, even Sophia, you're talking about your such a similar, how you could relate. And what I see is that, over time we begin to build up a framework of our faith and what we believe. We begin to build a house. And then something happens, and that house that we had built up, maybe not even realizing it, kind of comes crumbling down a little bit.
Yep.
And there's this moment where we wrestle with God, and we do it differently, right? You guys talked about this idea of like, God, you're mean, or how could you do this, or how could you do this, or I've lost favor. We literally were talking this morning, this idea of wrestling with God, Old Testament, Jacob, and it's almost as if, at least even my story, that we've grown up in a church culture where it's almost been looked down upon. Like you don't question, you don't wrestle with God. But because of that, there's this faith that might be shallow, that doesn't stand when the winds of life or the tragedies of life, the difficulty of the fallenness of our world and our flesh and spiritual enemy.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden we realize, because we haven't wrestled with God, we haven't contended over certain aspects of his character or who he is, and then we just have this shallow faith. But then out of it, you have this wrestling. So how did you begin to then see the light, or feel like you were able to move forward? What did that look like?
Mm-hmm.
How did that rebuilding go for you in your faith? And explain that.
Yeah. Well, like I said, we made another huge transition about 2 years into marriage, and that was to move back to Lynchburg, which meant Josh was going to be leaving everything he'd known, and it was very much a sacrificial decision on his end. But he also got to take a job that allowed us to live anywhere, and it also allowed his heart for seeing churches be mobilized to unreached people groups. He took a job that allowed him to really multiply that ministry.
Yep.
So, but it allowed us to live anywhere because he travels a lot. And so we came back to Lynchburg, and I did not just want to step back into my old life. My old life was a really good life, but one thing that I realized was that I was never around lost people, ever. I worked for a Christian university. If I wasn't at work, I was working on a degree.
Yep.
So I was like constantly writing theology papers.
Or serving in a church.
Or I was serving.
Yep.
And so I was studying constantly, and I was surrounded by ministry language and definitely doing ministry. I mean, very much doing ministry, but I was not engaging anyone consistently that didn't believe essentially the same things that I did and didn't grow up essentially the same way that I did. And I realized my life got really, in the name of ministry and good things, my life got really detached from the outside world. So, something good that came out of all the deconstruction was really like, all right, God, I'm going to put you to the test. Like, I believe that your Spirit really does indwell believers, and that we have the responsibility and honor of carrying that. Where we go, your presence goes. And that means we have to plant our life in places where your kingdom is not yet established. So we're just going to go all in. Like, I'm not going back into my bubble, Yeah. So we chose a side of town where we didn't know anybody, and we knew that life looked very different.
Yeah.
I was just praying that the Lord would, I didn't know what it was going to look like. I just was praying, God, give me an opportunity to regularly engage just the fractured part of this city that I love so much. Like, help me to be put in a position where I am regularly around fractured, broken lives. And just, Lord, you give that to me. I don't know what it's going to be. The day before our moving truck left Texas, a friend of mine posted online, hey, I'm looking for people that want to mentor youth aging out of foster care, like 10, 15 hours a week. And I was like, well,
there you go.
I teach online. I've got 10 to 15 hours a week. Let me find out about this. So I reach out to her. I find myself in a series of very informal interviews and end up accepting a part-time job that I'm like, what am I doing? Teaching life skills to youth, 17 to 20-year-olds who have grown up in foster care and are now in an independent living program. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. And ironically, the director of that program I used to serve with in our own youth ministry years before. So he knew, that I'd walked through life with these girls, and they were so close to me, and that, like, I love discipleship, and that's like what I'm built for. But he looked at me and he goes, you have no idea what you've gotten into, because these are not church kids.
Yeah.
And I said, I just know this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I believe that everyone should have an opportunity to follow Jesus. And there are a lot of people in this city, even this very church city, that no one has seen them as a potential disciple. No one has looked at them and said, my gosh, like, there's good news. And so I'm here, and I'll figure out the life skills part, because Lord knows I don't know how to cook. And I'm forgetting what the original question was.
Well, I mean,
What?
you began to, which is what I love about just when you talk, and even as you've began to not go back to your old life here in Lynchburg, but then to say, what does it look like to live out this mission that you believe so deeply in, that God's given all of us as like spirit indwelled individuals. So what is, if you had to articulate, what is that mission? What is that thing that gave you that sense of like purpose and like life and fulfillment.
Yeah.
Articulate that. You started getting there in that. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's the overarching story of God's heart for the world that we see in Scripture. I mean, even from the garden, he stamps his image on humanity, and he says, okay, you got 2 jobs. I want you to rule the world like I would, and I want you to take my image to the ends of the earth. Be fruitful and multiply. And so right there, you see the mission that he's given to humanity, a kingdom. He does the same thing with Israel. He blesses them. He calls out this group of people, but not to just give them a stamp of awesomeness, but to say, I want you, this blessing, I want you to be a blessing to the nations. I want you to draw the world to me because of how you live. Same thing that Jesus says to the church before he leaves. He gives every believer the same mission before he leaves, and that is to make disciples to the ends of the earth, baptize them, and be this multiplying force that carries his presence into the world. And so that is not a job description for elite Christians. That's the job he literally gave to humanity in its wholeness in the beginning. And it's the job description he gave to his church, which is all of us that accept the gospel. And so I think what drove those decisions was, man, I can't adequately do this if I'm not positioning my life to engage the outside world. So I'm going to do that in the most practical ways possible. I'm going to do that where we live. I'm going to make my house a place of hospitality, and I'm going to find a way to make sure that every week I am not just rubbing shoulders, but I am getting in the lives of people that are far from him, and trust that somehow in the mess that is being, that was still dealing with my own doubts, but the Lord was restoring, that he was going to work in that. And I think part of it was almost like, all right, Lord, I'm putting you to the test. Yeah. If what I believe is actually true, if what I see in your story that when you say we're your temple now, that we are the places where you dwell, and we are the building blocks to restoration of this broken world, then I've got to take you into places where your kingdom is not yet being built. And I'm just going to see if it works. And I'm here to tell you, it is an ongoing journey. Stepping into this part-time job that I did not need opened my eyes to a whole new world. It's bigger than foster care. Let's take the labels away. These are people who have grown up in our city, our very church city, where you can't go to Starbucks without seeing 10 people reading their Bible,
It's true.
And you can live in that life and think that is all to this city that there is. There's another side that I never saw before, and now I can't unsee it. There are so many families in this community that have never been touched by the gospel. They have never had a church member see them drowning and not just make a judgment and kind of, oh man, those are those kinds of people. Instead of being like, I've got the good news.
Yeah.
I'm going to come get around you. I'm going to come and sit with you for a while. I probably have something to learn from you too. And let the Spirit of God do work there. And working with these youth just blew my mind, because I'm realizing these are kids that grew up in my backyard, and their lives could not have been more different than what I was living. They don't know about a bubble.
Yeah.
They know nothing of it. And they were literally next door, you know? So, man, it made my prayers go from these big theological, eloquent, wordy things to just desperation, because I realized there are just things that only the Spirit of God can change. You cannot drum up, you can't program motivation, you can't invite to church enough life transformation. God has to do the work. And that's where my prayers over these kids' lives started becoming just prayers out of desperation of like, God, you've got to do something. And I would physically see the spiritual warfare on some of them. You could feel it in their apartments, you know? And it just, this part-time job I took just opened my world up to a whole new experience of ministry. And I'll say this, like it's hard, and you don't always get the, you know, I've been doing it now 3 years. You don't always get the success story, but you pray differently, and I've been able to see what it's like to be in the fight with Jesus. And I fully believe that he is at work in their lives, and I have seen fruit. Whereas some I've seen choose to reject it. There are some now who are part of our church, and there are some now who are following Christ. And yeah, it's been really beautiful to see him keep his promise.
Yeah. Wow. It's beautiful.
Yeah, I'm just, Maria, we could just let you talk. Just giving you the mic and just let you just talk. And we just are observers in this. Amazing. Wow.
Yeah, it's almost like as you began to live life testing God in his mission, in that there was almost part of that came the healing for you and the restoration for you.
Yep.
Right?
Absolutely.
And what I even see is that really it was a redefining of what maybe had been portrayed to you before of what thriving as a follower of Jesus actually looked like.
Totally.
Right? Or what the abundant life actually looked like. It was a reframing of that. That you got to taste and see and experience that just looked different, right? Was there ever temptation to go back? Like when you said you came back to Lynchburg, was there ever a temptation to go back to that you described that bubble where maybe it was more safe and controlled and maybe from the outside looked comfortable and appealing? Was there ever that temptation in you?
Honestly, no. Really,
You're crazy.
No, it's so... No. Yeah,
I believe you too.
There's no going back. Nope.
Yes.
That's an honest answer.
Yeah. Once you've tasted and seen.
It's almost like the whole time hearing you share like these 3 very specific stories, like the story of getting married and then living in Texas, moving here, this job, and now 2 little babies, like all of this is driven by mission and by purpose. And even if you didn't fully know what that mission or purpose was, it was like deeply embedded inside of you by the Spirit. Yeah. And it is without that mission and purpose, you would have crumbled. Like you wouldn't have said yes. You and Josh wouldn't have said yes to 2 kids and within this time frame, right?
Yeah.
You probably wouldn't have worked for this foster care service with these teens that you have no experience with, or like you're just out of your league in this element, right? Yeah. I would even go back to say like being a woman and wanting to go into theology and studying that wouldn't have probably even been something you embarked on. All of these like have such a thread of the mission and the purpose of God is like deep within you. And I don't know. I don't know if you have anything to speak into that, if that makes sense. But I just wonder if that is a key element to people not just floating and surviving and getting hit by the waves of life, because they will come, but almost being able to recover from those waves as a stronger and more, I don't want to say a better follower of Jesus, but just having a clearer picture of who he is. It all kind of goes back to having that mission and purpose inside of you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think what you're saying is right. You know, I think I'm a big proponent that language matters and how we say things matters. And I think there are some terms, some things that we say in the Christian world a lot that have negatively influenced our frame of thought. One of those being, I'm going to do it.
Okay,
Here we go.
I didn't know if you were going to
Here we
hesitate.
go. Here we go.
Let's go.
Calling. Sorry, not sorry.
No, I love it.
We talk a lot about, are you called to ministry?
Yeah.
So a hierarchy of
Yeah,
some people are called
like
to do
some are
it,
called and then some are just like
we'll
church
see
people.
We'll see you in heaven.
Yeah.
Right. And that whole dynamic, the language behind that has created a worldview.
Yeah.
That there are people who are called, and those people are pastors, and they work for churches or they're missionaries, but that's not my calling. Like, yeah, I'm a Christian, but
Come on.
that I'm not called to like that kind of Christian.
Yeah.
And that it's created this dichotomy that's, I think, bad both for the church attendee and
The actual church.
bad for church leadership.
Yeah. Yeah.
When in reality, that purpose, that was given to humanity.
Right.
That calling that Jesus put on the church was given to all of us. Even in the Old Testament, you know, God gave Israel this command to be a kingdom of priests. That was everybody was supposed to be take up this priestly responsibility of being an ambassador for him. And that is your identity. That's your full-time gig.
Yeah.
I don't care what your job is.
Yep.
You know, your job, your office, your title, that does not matter. You have a calling. If you accept the gospel, you accept a calling to full-time ministry.
Yep.
And that is your purpose.
Yeah.
And that, I think that was both a motivating factor for a lot of these decisions, but also really, again, anchoring when everything feels like floating and messed up and weird. Like, that doesn't change. That is one thing that does not change about your identity is being an image bearer of God means you take his image to the ends of the earth at all costs. And that can look like a lot of different things. So I believe less in these special callings. And, you know, if we want to get into semantics, I think the Lord definitely gives us seasons and assignments, but we put so much weight on those things that when those fall apart or they transition, it's like, oh, am I not called anymore? No,
Come on.
Yeah.
you've been called since the beginning of time.
Wow.
It just looks different in different seasons,
Yeah.
but you're still supposed to live in the fullness of that your whole life.
I wish you were more passionate about this, Maria. I just wish
Sorry, I've got the
wish-
Italian
I wish
hand.
you were more passionate about this. That's so good.
So good.
I love that. I want to get practical, right? Because
Yeah.
I think when someone interacts with you and hears your story, it can seem so distant from where they're at, right? Like, it's like, man, look at Maria. She's doing all this cool stuff. And I know that's not your heart. I'm just like,
Sure.
it can come as someone that maybe has not been living that out. They're like, how do I do that?
Yeah.
Is that possible? So to the person that is listening, that starts to see, man, maybe I've been just in the survival mode of missing out on the mission of God and living that out. What do they do? What's a practical next step for them?
Yeah. For me, it was asking the Lord for it.
Ooh, okay.
I mean, this, like I said, this role with working with teens and youth aging out, that came out of the blue. And it was after months of saying, Lord, show me what you want me to do. Show me what you want me to do. And and it was uncharted territory that I stepped into, but it was worth it. So ask the Lord for it, for one. But I think, too, like, examine your life. It's easy as a believer to only hang out with believers. It just is. So you can take very practical next steps as easily as, what are some things I like to do? For an example, my husband's really gotten into disc golf. I don't get it. But there's like a whole disc golf community. It's huge in our city.
And sometimes a little weird.
It's pretty weird.
Okay.
Oh, it's so funny.
But my gosh, that same principle applies of like, if I have the Holy Spirit inside of me, I'm carrying him into those communities.
That's
so
right.
Find something you're interested in and go do it with people who aren't like you.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be a job. It doesn't have to be, you pick up and buy a crazy old house downtown, like it can be. And I'm here to say it's worth it.
Yeah.
You might add a little bit of stress to your marriage. It's worth it, Do you find ways to open up your home? Like for us, we started an Airbnb, and that's allowed us to host hundreds of people from all over the country. And sometimes we don't even meet them. But man, it's allowed some sweet opportunities to develop relationships with people that are in our home. And we've gotten to have some really important conversations with them. So just look at what the Lord has given you, whether it just be giftings, hobbies, talents, your dwelling space, and just say, Lord, how can I leverage this for your kingdom?
That's it. I mean, literally, you are saying, once you understand and grasp the mission of God that he's given to every believer, take inventory of your life and say, how do I do those things that I normally do through or with the understanding and the purpose of this mission? And how can I make maybe small tweaks to that to be able to live on mission in those settings? Like you said, you're not saying that every person needs to completely unravel their lives or
right.
But just say, okay, how can I do this thing that I normally do through the lens of there are people who need to know about this message, who need to understand the image of God in their life, and also need to understand what Jesus has done for them and to live in his kingdom, right?
Yeah.
And to see it almost as everything I do is in light of the kingdom of God.
Yep.
Everywhere I go, I'm building his kingdom. And it's just it's a reframing of a worldview, honestly, perspective. Yeah. And I think when you start on that journey, it probably continues to snowball a little bit, like it,
100%.
Right?
Yeah.
Like you start to see more and more.
Yeah.
Like, oh my goodness. And all of a sudden you look back and you say, wow, God, I can't believe you actually used me to do all of this.
Yeah.
So that's beautiful. Sophia, do you have anything else? Final question?
I mean, I'm seriously floored. Like, I'm just like, what even?
Maybe just a closing thought.
Just what, and I know you might cringe at this, like, but like, what an inspiration, like, truly you are. I mean, like the impact that you will have on so many generations. Like, I know it's such simple, like, truth, but it is so profound. Even the idea of what a calling is, and what like the fact, like, versus the fact that we're all mandated by God, just how powerful that is. And so, yeah, every sacrifice that you and Josh have made, every tear you've cried, it's such a seed that is being sowed into myself right now and just the next generation. And so, yeah, just thank you.
friend.
Thank you for your vulnerability. And I'm just going to go home and reframe my whole life now. That is it.
That's so good. And hopefully you won't be the only one.
Yes. Yes.
So on that note, Maria, thanks for giving up your time, and especially since Josh is probably home with 2 children right now. But
That miracle nanny's got him right now. So.
thanks for your honesty,
Yeah.
your vulnerability, your passion. I hope it translates and people catch on to it. So thanks.
Thanks, friends.
Yeah.